An entire city mobilized. In 2005, Sinop came to a halt to search for Bruno Aparecido dos Santos, who was only 9 years old. João confessed to luring Bruno to a house under construction, said he assaulted, raped, and killed the boy. Now, in recent days, due to some events, the whole country remembered a cowardly and brutal crime that was committed there on October 28, 2005. 20 years ago in Sinop, Mato Grosso. The victim was Bruno Aparecido dos Santos, a little boy who was 9 years old. The boy's attacker, João Ferreira da Silva, who had been in prison since then and was sentenced to 52 years in prison. But a few days ago, he happily received a release warrant. However, less than 24 hours after being released, he was executed. A story that can be analyzed from several different perspectives, but that holds an absolute truth, a certainty. João will not harm any more children. I'm Marcos Campos. Welcome, everyone. If you like real crime stories, please subscribe and follow the channel. Episodes like this happen here every week. Follow me on Instagram. I am Marcos Campos. Over there, I post shorter, more summarized content and a bit of my daily routine for those who like to follow along. If possible, become a channel member. It really helps me. If you can't, that's okay. Just leave a like and a comment. That will already help a lot. Deal? Now that I've given the messages, let's get to the facts. Regardless of who they were in life, good or bad, homicide victims automatically become open cases to be handled by the military police and later cases to be investigated by the civil police. That's exactly what happened to João Ferreira da Silva, 46 years old, who was shot and killed on the morning of last Wednesday, December 10th, in Sinop, Mato Grosso. The action was recorded by nearby security cameras, which captured the execution of the man, which happened around 6:50 in the morning on Colonizador Enio Pepino Avenue, in front of the door of a hotel in the Santa Monica neighborhood. After gunshots were heard and the man fell to the ground shot, the fire department teams were called. But when they arrived at the scene, there was nothing they could do and the death was confirmed. But who was the victim then? And what was the reason for his violent death? Here then the story begins to take a different turn from what was suggested by the first impressions. In other words, no robbery, no theft. The information that the military police and the civil police recovered about the victim identified him as João Ferreira da Silva, a guy with a criminal past, and who had left on the day before his death, December 9th, the Dr. Osvaldo Florentino Leite Penitentiary, known as Ferrugem, in the city of Sinop, Mato Grosso. That prison unit, which a few years ago was severely criticized for the terrible hygiene conditions of its facilities, appears in several reports as an institution that underwent not only building renovations, but also administrative reforms, and that currently promotes the resocialization of its inmates by offering them cultural and professional activities. They participate in a reading project, make chess sets, and also have a sewing workshop. Currently, there are 1,430 inmates there, and the structure is organized like a small neighborhood, let's say, with several challenges in the areas of security, health, and education, as the management of the place explains. Well, it was from that institution that João left after 20 years incarcerated. Whether he showed good behavior and other details of his life during that time in confinement, nothing is known. What is printed in all the news sources are the reasons why he spent 2 decades there in prison. As already mentioned here at the beginning of the episode, João was tried and convicted for the cowardly and brutal crime he committed on October 28, 2005. Right there in Sinop, Mato Grosso. The victim was the little boy Bruno Aparecido dos Santos, 9 years old. The prosecution showed at the trial that in October 2005, João Ferreira, who worked as a bricklayer, lured little Bruno to a house under construction in the Nossa Senhora Aparecida neighborhood. an isolated place where the boy was assaulted, abused, and killed. In 2005, Sinop came to a halt to search for Bruno Aparecido dos Santos, who was only 9 years old. On the day of the crime, Bruno was at his father's house, from where he left alone to go to his aunt's house. It was something he usually did, and we understood that it didn't pose any risk to him. It should have been a very close place in a familiar neighborhood. However, Bruno disappeared, and this made his family desperate, so they immediately started searching for him. And they immediately filed an official report, the police report. The mother, Mrs. Josiana da Silva, the father as well, and other relatives accompanied by a group of people close to the family and even unknown volunteers were all united and got involved in the search for the child. There are images from local news coverage that give us an idea of how complex this work was. Since the area to be searched involved the whole region, cut by rivers with dense forests and dirt roads, in short, a vast area surrounding the city. It's through these images from 2005 that we can see Bruno's face and understand the level of tension the crime caused in the city. And the anguish turned into revolt.
These 10 days we were searching, suffering, 10 days looking for this boy. Why would this wretch do this? Why?
Just so you know the unusual name of this city, Sinop is an acronym for Sociedade Imobiliária Noroeste do Paraná, the company that brought farmers from northern Paraná to that northern region of Mato Grosso. The exploration of the region was a monumental adventure that began back in 1972, and Sinop currently has more than 200,000 inhabitants. Well, now that we've set the context, after days of searching without success, there was an obvious and growing anguish among the family and everyone who knew the boy. Apparently, João Ferreira da Silva had already been considered a suspect in Bruno's disappearance, but in fact, his downfall only came when the bricklayer, who was about 25 or 26 years old at the time, attacked and tried to assault another boy, a little older than Bruno, around 12 years old. This second victim, within just 10 days, managed to escape and identify the abuser and attacker. The police work then became more effective, more focused, and finally shed light on Bruno's case. That's right, guys. The second boy told the police the place where he had been taken, an abandoned building nearby. There, the police found marbles belonging to Bruno and also pieces of wood with blood stains. In other words, evidence of the boy's presence and that it was a crime scene. After being detained, the construction worker João Ferreira da Silva confessed to committing the homicide of Bruno, who until then had only been registered as missing. All hope died there. It was learned that the minor was dead after being abused and assaulted. The location of the body was provided, and then the recovery of the body was carried out. The images are extremely shocking, as it was Bruno's own father who dug up the place where the body was buried and removed his dead son. From this shallow grave, located in a vacant lot near the aggressor's residence, the child's body was found without clothes, with hands tied, buried in a hole about 1 meter deep. The clothes were carefully stored inside a plastic bag next to the body. Without a doubt, this terrifying experience of unearthing the body of his murdered son never disappeared from Bruno's father's memory. Mrs. Josiana, his mother, said she didn't want to see her son in the condition in which he was found. Just thinking about the fact that many days had passed since the murder and the body already showed clear signs of decomposition. Besides the marks of that extremely monstrous and cowardly violence, there was the outrage of the local population, right? It was so intense that about 500 people surrounded the police station in an attempt to invade and lynch. The police stopped it, but the images have been recorded, so that no one doubts that everyone present there was willing to take justice into their own hands. Or isn't taking justice into their own hands about avenging the death of an innocent child? We can clearly understand some shouts and accusations that João was a volunteer in the search groups. He pretended to be supportive of Bruno's family and saw the look of pain, the tears of despair, the anguish that streamed from the eyes of those parents. He saw the parents cry and suffer for days, while he certainly remembered that crime with pleasure. He launched the new attack just 10 days after the first. And then I ask you guys, do you think he reflected on his actions? Did he feel any remorse? Or did the abuse and death of Bruno awaken in him a sadistic, wicked appetite? The monster that exists in this person and in others like him, which we've seen here several times before. And if it was the first crime, we don't know either. It could have been the first crime. Why not? Many times, I've already mentioned here to you, the guy does it, apparently he doesn't get caught, and that triggers that sick pleasure in him. And he wants to do it again. So, to stop the barbarity of all those people who were there wanting João Ferreira's head, he was given a borrowed uniform which he put on, disguised himself, and was accompanied by some police officers. He was moved from the local police station. In fact, he left through the back door, and jumping over walls and entering the yards of random houses, he got away alive from that horror movie scene. Thus, escorted, he arrived in Cuiabá, from where he escaped, but was recaptured hours later at a bus terminal. And here his fate was already sealed. In short, 3 years later, in 2008, João went to trial before the court with a defense attorney by his side. He received a 42-year prison sentence for Bruno's murder. The evidence gathered against him included the autopsy report, injury map, crime scene analysis, and also confirmation of the concealment of the body. Despite the initial confession, João stated in court at that time that he did not remember whether or not he was the one who committed the acts. Look at that. In another case then, he received another 10 years of sentence for violent, indecent assault. The case of the second boy who, thank God, escaped with his life and whose report led to the quick arrest of this man. As has been mentioned several times here on the channel, even if we sometimes question the sentences given, let the law be enforced. João Ferreira served 20 years in prison out of a total of 42 years, plus 10 years determined in his sentences. We don't know if during that time this process of social reclusion changed in any way. I mean, if it changed for the better. A man who spends 20 years in detention is sure to change. He'll never be the same as he was at the beginning of his sentence, right? That's clear. It's obvious. Most inmates become more hardened over time. But let's not get into that here, nor philosophize about it. If he made enemies inside the prison, maybe. Why not? Friends as well. Maybe. Why not? We still don't know any of that. It's possible that the investigation to be carried out now will bring us that information. So far, what we know basically comes down to the footage of his death. 2 men were near the entrance of the hotel, now at 25, where João spent his first night in freedom. In the famous stakeout, these men were lying in wait, just waiting for the ex-convict to come out and show himself. One of them, wearing a sweatshirt, a mask, and a cap, enters the hotel reception and leaves moments later. Next, João appears in the video, leaving the inside of the establishment, and when this happens, João is approached by that man on the right side of the screen. He comes closer and apparently asks the victim for his identification. In this case, it would be to confirm the target, right? Preventing another guest who might suddenly look physically similar to João from dying in his place because of a mistake or a rush. Anyway, it seems strange, but that's exactly how it happened. The footage is available for anyone who wants to confirm all of this. This shooter, with his gun in hand, forces João to take a few steps to the left of the screen, moving away from the entrance and the hotel reception there. Another man is leaning against the wall, wearing orange pants that look like a street cleaner's uniform, right? Like public cleaning and all that. After that, there are 3 shots and the pair of suspects flee the scene. João is now lifeless, his body is lying on the ground, and right after that, several shots are fired. The construction worker falls on the sidewalk and the suspects run away. Teams from the civil police and also from Polytech were called to analyze the crime scene and carry out forensic work. They quickly found at least 3 shell casings at the scene. The body was then sent to the medical examiner's office for autopsy and identity confirmation. Just a quick note, okay? The victim had already been identified by the authorities despite the need for tests, formalities, and so on. For, fingerprinting and all that. According to the civil police, it is now up to them to investigate the facts and determine the motive, which, of course, may or may not, or should be related to the victim's criminal record. So basically, to identify the suspects and find out if the execution was planned, which, in my layman's opinion, is probably yes, it was a planned crime. There's also that thing you might be thinking about, right? But what if in prison he didn't, make some friends or maybe an enemy or something? Maybe it could be, but I don't know, right? 20 years in there, it might have been settled right then. He didn't get out. The feeling is that it really has to do with the boy's case and also the other one, right? Who unfortunately escaped. I don't know. Maybe we don't have relevant details about this investigation, like, for example, whether João's release was announced in advance or not, for the person to be there the next day. In other words, did everyone already know he would be out on the street? Did those people who had a score to settle with him know somehow they had privileged information? There are other cases like this, right? Floresvaldo de Oliveira comes to mind here. Who remembers Cabo Bruno, executed just days after his release from prison? The same thing also happened with Aclides Marcelo Gomes, the bad boy, 2 cases that I've already talked about here on the channel. Another one who also had a short life outside of prison was João Acácio Pereira da Costa, right? The famous, well-known red light bandit. And on the 11th, now in December, guys, reporters from the region searched Bruno's house, the kid's house, and talked to Mrs. Josiana, his mother. She reported that as soon as she learned about João's death, she went to the place where the body of her son's killer was. The woman said she needed to see with her own eyes that the life of that criminal had come to an end. In the words of this mother, God forgive me for feeling happy about the death of this man. Her reflection is very clear, right? Very simple, assertive, maybe very similar to that of many of us here. The death of João Ferreira da Silva doesn't bring Bruno back to life, nor does it undo the crimes this man committed in the past. But it prevents him from abusing children again. It prevents him from killing a mother again with a heart heavy with sorrow. He adds that justice has finally been served. She said she doesn't know who committed the crime, who shot João, but she said that if it were possible, if she had the opportunity, she would have done it herself. Yeah, I think we can understand a pain of that magnitude, right? That only grows with time. And with the absence of her son, she lost a 9-year-old son. Imagine all that period of childhood, teaching, building up the child's education and culture. It's the time when they're just blossoming into life, and then a bastard like this comes and does something like that. It's understandable the pain this mother feels, the many absences of her son, right? Even because Mrs. Josiana reflects that if her son were alive, if his story had followed its normal course today, Bruno would be almost 30 years old. He would likely be married with children, and she would be a grandmother. In other words, Mrs. Josiana also thinks about the grandchildren she never had the chance to have. And this would open the door to a lot of discussions, right? To what extent, depending on your beliefs, right, forgiveness goes. There's also this parallel, but a person like this guy, this murderer who was just killed, I don't know if there's any recovery. Because I'm speaking as an ordinary person, okay? Also as a father, trying to understand all of this. Someone who abuses, mistreats, ties up a child, removes their clothes, buries them, and hides the evidence by burying the clothes once to avoid being discovered. They spend days there, acting normal next to the family, anxious, right, because of the child's disappearance. 10 days later, they do it again. So, I think there is a stain, a brain defect that you just can't give the benefit of the doubt to. In my view, though I'm not a professional, there's a criminal case every day. These are things we see that make us angry, correct? What's the reason? I'd like to understand. It's likely this will still be reported, but I'd like to understand the motivations. Is it purely just the letter of the law? Oh, because he was okay in jail. So he has to get the benefit of being released before serving his full sentence, which is already a questionable sentence, right? Once the guy was 42 years old, got another 10 for the other crime and all that, which, right, according to our laws, if it were just that one, he probably wouldn't even go to jail, right? It would be commuted to community service or something like that, but okay, but he did it with Bruno and then he was arrested. And why did he get out early, right? Only 20 years. Man, you might say, oh, 20 years, that's a long time. Sure, it's a long time, but there's this, what I just said, right, man? Does the guy really have the ability to straighten out, let's say? Because, man, I don't know what kind of mind does that to a 9-year-old child. I really don't know if there's a solution, but of course I want to know each of your opinions, right? Dialogue is always welcome, right? Let's talk about it here. If you don't agree with me, that's okay. Show me your point of view. Maybe you can even convince me otherwise. Taking justice into your own hands is a whole other story, isn't it, guys? I don't know, maybe it is, but anyway, come in. We're going to keep discussing this until tomorrow, because then there's also the whole issue of people being fed up, right? Of seeing things like this happen, right? They're fed up. Then there's the guy who I don't know either. I think you also have to have a bit of, I don't know, abnormality to get through it. Because it can't be a very simple thing to do, right? Because then your whole religious conviction comes into play and so on, right? You get there and the person asks, what's your name? Oh, so-and-so, what an insult. It can't be very easy to do, right? But when we look from the outside, just as a spectator, you understand, right? You understand this mother's words. Maybe you say something like, man, the guy goes there because justice is kind of weird. So he goes and takes the guy out of circulation to prevent new victims, right? All the cards are on the table. They're all understandable. But leave your opinion for us, all right? Thanks for your company. A kiss from Ruivo and see you next episode.